I'm sorry we started a little bit later than advertised at 7:15, but the High Commissioner in Guyana had an appointment with the President and had to move it. But lo and behold, the President cancelled, so he's here live and in the flesh. Greg Quinn has been in Guyana for 5.5 years now. He's been a superb High Commissioner. He's here, there, he's everywhere. You see him. He knows everybody, knows all ins and outs, and in those 5.5 years, he's not gone native, unlike some previous High Commissioners. He's retained his Britishness all the way through. He's finally leaving next week after those 5.5 years. He had to come back to be a locum High Commissioner for a couple of months. But Greg, welcome. What's your lasting images you take away from Guyana?
I think fundamentally, John, and first of all, thank you for having me here. As you say, over 5.5 years, 5 years and 9 months to be exact, which makes me the longest serving High Commissioner in Guyana. I mean, lasting images. I mean, there's been so much. I mean, we've done an awful lot in nearly 6 years here. So work-wise, there's a lot of good stuff, and we could talk around some of that a little bit later. But on a personal level and on a broader level, I've managed to get up to the river border with Venezuela in the west. I've gotten down to Oriala on the border with Suriname in the east. I've gotten down to Sand Creek, and I've been to most places in between. And the consistent picture and memory which I will take away from all of those is of a wonderfully hospitable and friendly country, and a wonderfully beautiful country. And I'm not just talking about the obvious places like Kaiter and whatever, but some of the smaller places where I have been, some of the places off the beaten track, which have their own beauty, and which whenever you don't realize until you're there. I mean, for example, whenever we were driving back from Sand Creek round the mountains, when there's a thunder and lightning storm over the top of it and the sort of lighting up the mountains in the dusk, those are memories and images that, I'm not going to get anywhere else really.
If there's one place you'd want to go back to, where would that be?
One place to go back to?
In Guyana.
Well, I've been to Kaiter 6 times, so I'm not. I think I've safely done that. In a strange sort of way, one of the places I've liked most has been on the river down from Chenapau heading towards Kaiter, and that was a really peaceful and quiet and nice river trip. And indeed, the journey into Chenapau was nice. Or was interesting, sorry, and the journey out of Chenapau was interesting because the landing strip at Chenapau is not exactly flat, and there's a mountain at the end of it. So you have to, but that sort of hour or so floating up and down the river out of Chenapau was, away from everything, no mobile phones, no coverage, the water, a boat, and the guy driving the boat. It was just really, really nice. So I'd love to go back to Chenapau. I'd also love to do the other side of that forest trail at Paramakatoi. One of my enduring disappointments is that I never actually managed to get to Paramakatoi, which is somewhere where we are actually funding the upgrade of the health post there. And so I'd always wanted to go there to see the health post, but I never actually managed it.
What have been your highlights of the nearly 6 years there?
Well, if you look at it, obviously Prince Harry came in December 2016.
Prince who?
Prince Harry in December 2016. So it's not often you get to host a royal visit like that. We've had the Royal Navy visiting again, which we hadn't had for nearly 20 years. We had a multitude of ministerial visits. And more, so there's been a lot more activity and interest in Guyana, I think, over the past 6 years than there has been for quite a long time before that. And then the broader things like the significant increase in UK support, be that through the infrastructure fund, be that through security sector reform, be it on forestry, be it on health, or be it on education through things like cheating scholarships. Whenever I look back and sort of total up the value of UK assistance to Guyana under my watch, we're looking at close on 150 million US dollars of grant assistance. That's not loans, that's grant assistance.
Over 6 years.
Over my period of time here, yeah.
That's fine. So what about the lowlights? You've had a few.
Well, so before I go back to lowlights, there's one other thing which I've done recently, actually, which I will always remember, which is I went down to Albion to see the sugar estate, and I walked through the cane fields in Albion. And I came out of the cane fields, and one of the guys who was working at Albion said, I don't know when there was the last time a British High Commissioner went walking through the cane fields instead of just sort of turning up at the sugar factory. And it's, I wish I'd done it earlier, because, as you well know, John, I mean, sugar is such an integral part of this, of the history and the politics and whatever of this country, that it was a shame it had taken me so long to actually get to that level, into the fields to actually sort of feel that. In terms of the lowlights, well, I mean, there's not been a huge number of lowlights, to be honest. I guess some of the lowlights came about after the election, and some of the quite frankly unacceptable personal abuse that was thrown in my direction and my colleagues' direction. And I've got a thick skin. I come from Northern Ireland. I've been called lots of things in my time, so it bounces off me. And most importantly, I know that doesn't represent the 99. No, that doesn't represent the 750,000 people in this country. It represents a very, very tiny minority of it. But I suppose that's probably the closest I can say to come to a low light. And in the context of what it was, whilst I don't think it's excusable, it's understandable that some people, whenever they're angry and they're upset, say things like that, because certainly in Northern Ireland and in the UK, people, when they're angry and upset, say things that maybe in the cold light of day they wouldn't.
So have you ever been physically threatened in Guyana in recent years?
No, not at all. I mean, I've had the odd letter, but I've never had anybody physically come up to me in the street or whatever. And that I contrast with other places I've been, and I wouldn't name them, but I've been tear gassed in countries. I've been threatened by police in other countries. I've been shot at in other countries. I've never felt physically threatened here. I think it's a low light, but it's not really comparable, I think, to elsewhere. And I think it's definitely not representative of Guyana or its people.
But you do have quite good security, and you did put barriers around the High Commission during the election season, didn't you?
Well, I was only there one day because there had been a very specific and clear threat against us, but it was half of one day, I think, and it was an appropriate measure for one appropriate period of time. But if you look at it on a day-to-day basis, yes, we have security. All British High Commissions and embassies around the world have security. It's just it's more the nature of the world we live in, as opposed to necessarily the country that we live in, because sometimes the people who might cause the threat are not actually citizens of the country in which you're currently based.
Any sort of racism, reverse racism, come your way?
Not that I've ever come across. I mean, No, not at all, actually, John. Not that I'm aware of.
Before we move on to the election, I mean, the reason that the Brits are much more interested in Guyana is it 3 letters, isn't it? OIL. I mean, what does oil mean for Guyana?
Well, I think there's a misconception, and I'll challenge you on that one, John, that we've suddenly become interested as a result of oil. I mean, we've been here since, well, long before independence, obviously. We've been active here long before oil and gas was discovered. The assistance we provided, there was assistance long before oil and gas was discovered. And there's, it's not just a historical link, but there's been a business, an economic, and an educational link through all of those 50-odd years of 59, 54 years of independence. So I think to say that, we've only suddenly discovered Guyana or rediscovered Guyana after oil is certainly not my experience. And certainly my predecessors would argue with you on that one, I think.
It's been a bit one way though. I mean, you've been giving them aid up until really 2 or 3 years ago. Now it's going to be a hugely prosperous economy, isn't it?
Well, it should be. I mean, my view is very clearly that, oil and gas properly managed is a very good thing for every citizen of this country. And what oil and gas properly managed will do is to provide the funds that will allow the development of infrastructure, agriculture, educational, social services, health services, and also, and I think this is important as well, because given the world that we now live in and what my Prime Minister said yesterday about a move towards a renewable focused economy, oil and gas provides the money to allow Guyana to move away from power generated by heavy fuel oil and diesel to power which will ultimately be hydro, wind, solar, whatever. Now, the important thing, of course, is that every member of society, every citizen of this country needs to feel the benefit of oil and believe that they're feeling the benefit of oil. And that's what, the government must make sure happens.
Just to prove we're alive, there's a question coming from Andre Brande. Will you encourage the Guyanese government to develop the Natural Resources Fund along the lines of the successful Norwegian Oil Fund? Should that be their model?
I mean, I think there's any number of models. I came from Kazakhstan before I came here, and Kazakhstan had their own sovereign wealth fund, natural resources fund. I mean, I think one of the UK's eternal regrets is that we never actually set up a sovereign wealth fund. We spent the money, and then it was a bit too late whenever we realised we probably should have banked some of that. I don't think. I wouldn't get too hung up on one model, follow one model or this model or the other model. I think the important thing is that there is a sovereign wealth fund, natural resource fund in place, that a proportion of the money the money gained from oil production is put in that fund as a rainy day fund. And that whatever money isn't put in that fund, or whatever money might be taken out of that fund, is taken out with a very clear justification and a very clear explanation to why it's important for developmental purposes. Or, for example, in Kazakhstan, the one time they had touched the fund, I think in the 10 years before I left there, was whenever they had the global crash. We had the global crash in sort of 2008. And they touched up the fund to support the banking industry. I think that was a justifiable thing. I mean, we in the UK put money into supporting the banking industry. So whether, a Norwegian model or a Kazakh model or whatever, I don't think it really matters to me. It's just having a fund in place where you put a proportion of the money gained away for the future, because ultimately, oil and gas isn't going to last forever. It is not going to be in your benefit to spend it all now, because you want your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren to actually still be able to benefit from that as well.
So what will Guyana look like in 5 years' time? 1 barrel of oil per person per day. What difference will that make?
Well, I mean, I would like to think if I come back here in, say, 5 or 10 years' time, we will see a booming Georgetown. More importantly, we will see a booming hinterland and coastland strip, and not just booming in oil and gas, but seeing an expansion and a development of agriculture, seeing a very well-trained workforce be they working on civil engineering, be they doing plumbing, electricity, electricians, whatever, and to see, a broader range of economic activity. As I say, you can't just focus on oil and gas, but what oil and gas will do will be allow you to develop and fund that diversified economy. I'd also expect, and certainly given everything that's said by both this government and the previous government, we're not going to, see a degradation in the environment in terms of deforestation or whatever. In fact, I think we would see the reverse, and for Guyana to be increasingly a model for the rest of the region as to how you can actually put in place and build and develop and thrive on a green economy.
How much is already in the oil fund in the Federal Reserve Bank in New York? Is it 150 million US dollars already?
It's something like that, John. I must admit, I don't know the exact figure, but it's something like that. And that's on production, which is being about 70,000 barrels a day. I think they're now up to about 100,000 barrels a day.
Now, you've worked in other oil-rich countries. I mean, do you hold out hope for Guyana? The resource curse and corruption?
Well, let's go back to Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, which is a very, has got a big oil industry, big gas industry. They built themselves a new capital. Mm-hmm. So they built a new capital. They built a new business center. They built a new business capital as well. They improved the lots of they had better social security. They had better education. So I think I hold out huge amounts of hope. Now, ultimately, there are always going to be risks and there are always going to be challenges. And there are always going to be temptations for people. And I think this is where the population and civil society and the media also have a role, because they have to hold the executive and the government to they have to hold them to account and say, look, ultimately you are working for us. So we've got to make sure you're working for us. And if there are examples of corruption, if there are examples of inappropriate behavior, then whoever's responsible for that needs to be called out for it, and action should be taken against it. I think it's unrealistic to expect in any country no corruption. I'm not going to say there's no corruption in the UK. I'm certainly not going to say. I think it's unrealistic to say there's going to be no potential corruption issues. But what I would expect is for any corruption or whatever that is discovered to be called out and to be investigated, and for the relevant people to be prosecuted.
And do you think the Guyanese media and the Guyanese civil society is strong enough to do that? Or will they?
I think if you look around, there's if you look in the papers, you see examples already of the newspapers calling out corrupt activity. You see some of the civil society organizations calling this stuff out as well. Now, it doesn't mean there's not scope for more. The more media, the more civil society there is, the better. So I think I would say there's already examples of that happening, on a day-to-day basis here.
Cultural News seems to be running a campaign about Guyanese oil, aren't they, in all of their news stories?
Well, Kate, this is not new. I mean, Kiter's been talking about oil for as long as I've been here, and has, I think has flagged up, it's flagged up a variety of concerns about it, and certainly it's not. I don't think it's a bad thing for there to be a conversation around things like that. And I think it's important that there's a conversation around oil, because ultimately oil and oil proceeds must be spent for the benefit of the population. And people need to think that oil and oil proceeds are being spent for the benefit of people.
Now we may come back to oil, but Exxon that's a major place to expand in. Total is as well. I mean, there are an awful lot of eggs in the Guyanese basket, aren't there? I mean, and today I see there was one well which came up without oil, which is the success rate in Guyana is 90%. Is that right?
Well, yeah. So I think the figures I use are we've had 24 wells drilled, and 21 of those have been successful. Exxon have drilled 18 successful wells of those 21. I mean, that's an unprecedented. I mean, I've said this many times before. That's an unprecedented hit rate. But it's interesting that, when one well turns up with potentially non-commercially viable reserves, everybody gets shocked, really, because the success here has been phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. So people are now going, oh no, but actually, let's still look at this. There have been 21 out of 24 successful wells drilled since I've been here. That is, and what, 9 billion so far barrels of recoverable oil assessed.
And now the questions are coming in fast and furious. Professor Clem Sitaram, the great Professor Clem Sitaram, wants to know if Guyana has a future without solving its ethnic problem.
Well, I must tell Clem I'm going to come and see him when I get back, because I want him to sign the books his books that I've bought. So I think one of and this would be something we get into, I think, already, John, if we were talking about the post-election period. I think one of the real lessons and takeaways from me from that post-election period was very much that ethnic divide, which came to which was very much to the fore on that post-election period. Some people might have heard me talk about, there's work on constitutional reform necessary, but I'm also of the view that there's also work to be done on reconciliation. And where I come from, we went through a very turbulent and violent religious-based conflict. Now, we haven't got certainly anywhere near the level of conflict here that we had in Northern Ireland, but I think we need to get to a stage where there is a process of reconciliation, and where people feel that they've had an opportunity to air their grievances, to be listened to be understood, and for some changes to be made. And I think that potentially we, given our Northern Ireland experience, have got a potential role to play in helping to sort of flag up what happened in Northern Ireland. It's not going to be an easy thing, John. I mean, and Clem knows this more than anybody. It's not going to be an easy thing to do, but I think it's a very necessary thing to do, because that sort of ethnic-based divide is not going to be helpful to this country going forward.
So there's room for a Belfast Agreement in Guyana then?
Yeah, for one. Yeah, I think there's certainly room for, as I say, it's not as extreme as it was in Northern Ireland by no stretch of the imagination. But I think it's important to address, the concerns and the issues as early as possible, and try as much as possible to resolve those.
Some 15 years ago, one of your predecessors sent Moses Nagamu to Ralph Trotman and a few others to Northern Ireland. I met them in London.
Yeah.
Didn't have a lot of effect on them, really, did it?
Well, maybe the situation was different there. And although the ethnic basis of politics has been around for a long time, it never really struck me as being quite so deep-seated and deep-rooted, and potentially problematic on a day-to-day basis until the post-election period here. And I think there were a lot of people in all signs of society here who were also quite shocked by some of the commentary and some of the statements that were coming out. And so therefore, I think nobody wants to go down a road where that gets any worse. And so there's an opportunity, I think, to look at the reconciliation as part of a broader piece on reform of the Constitution and such like. And because ultimately, at the end of the day, there is more than enough. There's going to be more than enough money, resources, whatever, available for every single citizen of this country to benefit. So there is, this Guyana's got, if you look at it this year, it's going to have 26% growth. The only country that's going to have growth in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I think globally, the largest growth of any other country in the world. Now, yes, that's dropped from about 84%, I think it was pre-COVID. But I tell you what, there's a lot of countries that would love to have 26% growth, John. There's lots of countries like to have 2.6% growth, never mind 26%.
In our own, Greg.
So the important thing to me is, there is, in frank terms, there is more than enough for every person and every citizen of this country. But at the same time, there does need to be an opportunity, because there are some deep-seated fears on all sides that I think need to be addressed.
Now, the question's coming in fast and furious from the Guyanese profs. This is David Daverdeen. Apart from politics and economics, what aspects of Guyanese culture do you cherish?
Yeah, I knew David would ask the intelligent question. Not that Clem's wasn't, obviously. It's difficult because, there's a real cross-section of culture here. Now, I must say up front, John, a previous boss of mine, who shall remain nameless, once called me a cultural Philistine. So I may not actually be the best person to talk about culture. But having said that, some of the people who I've met here, who I shall remember most, are actually in the cultural field, being people like Stanley Greaves, for example. People like Eddie Grant. A lot of the indigenous groups and the indigenous performance groups. So what I would take away culturally is the fact that, there is such a broad range of culture here, and there's such a wide diversity of culture here that, there's a bit of everything, really. And I know David is a poet as well, and I have got his book also.
You'll sign them as well for you, Greg.
I'll get him to sign that one, yeah.
How many dull evenings have you spent in the Culture Centre?
Well, but not necessarily for cultural events, John.
This is true. Now let's move on, if you can, to the election. You were an international observer. You saw the voting, which went smoothly as far as you could tell. The counting was going very smoothly. And then something happened on the Friday. Was it Friday or the Thursday? Mr. Mingo decided Thursday to do his magic. When did you realize things were not going quite as they should have done?
Well, I think it was it even Thursday? It might even have been Wednesday, John. That week is sort of a blur, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think it was maybe the Wednesday, actually, when we started to see things. And there's been a lot said, and we have said a lot. And the fundamental point for me is, it was, it wasn't just me. It wasn't just the ABCE saying this. It was CARICOM, it was the Commonwealth, it was the OAS, it was the Carter Centre. This was a broad swathe of countries from around the world. and countries who do not necessarily always agree with each other. Very much so. Lots of countries who don't necessarily agree with each other. And what we saw and what we said at the time was clearly an attempt to subvert the democratic process and to subvert the will of the people. And it was very clear for all of us that, as I had done in 2015, I was here in 2015 before the election then, and I talked about with my then American and my then Canadian colleagues, we were also very forthright about the importance of, adhering to the will of the people and the democracy, good governance, and the rule of law. And what we did this year, to my mind, was exactly the same. It was no different. It went on longer, but the principle was fundamentally the same, that whoever the people had voted for had to have or had to be given power.
You were threatened by the then foreign minister at one point, weren't you? And he took you all into a room and said, "You're here in sufferance." And this is when Owen Arthur took her on, I believe.
Yeah, so Owen did say, Owen said what he said. And, Owen was very clear about what he thought. And I think he spoke for all of us in that room. And one of my sort of lasting regrets from all of this is that, Owen, who played such a strong role in advocating and supporting the process and advocating for the will of the people to be respected, didn't actually live to see the results of that. But I hope that maybe he's looking down on us with some quiet satisfaction that in the end democracy prevailed.
How did you feel as a sort of accredited diplomat to be treated like a little boy by the foreign minister? She's threatened you.
John, as I said before, I've been called worse by a lot of people. And it's like water off a duck's back. I think ultimately we made our position clear on several occasions, and it is what it is.
No, of course, that was a Wednesday. And then, of course, the Friday, you were invited to GCOM by Mr. Mingo were you there for when he had put the sheet up?
No, I didn't go for I wasn't there for the bed sheet day, or whatever they've called it. But I think there was a clear pattern, John, and we've talked about this on, the ABC and others spoke about this at some length and in several statements about, the importance of a credible result and, a credible result which respected the processes, and the processes had been very clearly laid out. They are very clearly laid out and have been reinforced by the acting Chief Justice and the CCJ and other organisations or other legal organisations. So the bottom line is that okay, it took 22 weeks, but at the end of 22 weeks, the new government, who by everything we saw legitimately won the election, was sworn in and took power. And at the same time, there is now a need and an obligation for the new opposition to do what an opposition is meant to do, which is to hold the government of the day to account. And that's one of the fundamental important roles of any Westminster, in fact any democratic process, is an opposition which doesn't let the government get away with things, and I look forward to seeing that going forward.
Now, are you prepared to share with the audience what a CARICOM Prime Minister said to you about Guyana when you suggested it was a banana republic? You don't have to name it. What was his phrase?
I'm not sure it's really repeatable on sort of.
Oh, yes.
What is it? But I think the important thing for me more, John, is the fact that what that demonstrated to me was the level of, I guess it's disbelief that many of us felt at what we were seeing, and at the very blatant attempts to, to not respect the will of the people.
Did you ever despair, because you and I were in communication quite a lot, did you ever think, my God, there's going to be a military coup? Or
No, not. I mean, I think I'm always and always have been a glass half full person. And I think that, most of the time, not all the time, most of the time, what is right happens. But I never despaired really here, because the people here, at the end of the day, it wasn't necessarily the international community, but there was a large, you saw the number of young people who were out there wanting to see their votes being respected. You saw the pressure from Guyanese for votes to be respected. And I think that's what gave everybody hope. As I say, it's always a glass half full role, and I was always hopeful and expecting that at the end of the day, the democratic process would run its course in the way that it should do, and the way that it ultimately did.
What was the crunch? I mean, you threatened sanctions. The Americans did sanction. They took away people's visas and also threatened to freeze their bank accounts. And Mike Pompeo allegedly rang President Granger on the Friday night and said, come in, number 5, your time is up. Was that what turned the corner?
I don't know. I really don't know. I must admit, John, that I was sitting here on the Sunday of the swearing in, and I think I was as surprised as anyone at how quickly things developed. But I think by that stage, we had gone through several rounds of legal processes as well. And it was very clear that there was no legal process which would change the result. The legal process that was available is the election petition, and the election petition could only be put in place after a new government was sworn in. So I'm not sure if there was one issue, or if there was one point or one activity which made a difference. But I think all of the legal options had been run out, and it was very clear that the only option left was an election petition, and that entailed not an acceptance of the results, but a change of government, and then a petition process after that.
What sanctions did you have in your back pocket? I mean, the Americans were freezing bank accounts.
Well, I certainly wouldn't go into details about them, but there were a variety of options on the table, which we don't like sanctioning people. It's not our chosen way of doing it, and I think we are all very happy that we didn't have to go down that road, John.
So you came out of that 5-month process dismayed, disgusted, disappointed. What best word to describe it?
No, I think going back to the peace and reconciliation, I came out, very clearly thinking that there needed to be a lot of work done on things like reconciliation and constitutional reform and whatever, to ensure that in 2025 we don't end up in the same position. I came out glad that the democracy, good governance, and the rule of law had prevailed. But as I say, I came out with this very clear belief that work needs to be done to ensure we don't get to the same place in 2025.
Now, Freddie Kassoon thinks that you and the Canadian High Commissioner and the American ambassador should have statues put up to you in Georgetown.
Yeah.
You preserve democracy. Would you come back to unveil the statue?
I'm not sure a statue of me would be. I mean, I'm not. I mean, that's very nice of Freddie, but I'm not sure that's necessary. All we did, John, was we did our job. That's at the end of the day, we did our job, because one of our jobs is, to uphold core value. So one of my jobs, sorry, I can't speak for anybody else, but one of my jobs is to uphold core values of the institutions that we are a member of. And as a member of the Commonwealth, there are core values which we all share. And democracy, good governance, and rule of law are key to that. So all I was doing was upholding the principles and the values which we had all signed up to. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't doing anything spectacular out of the ordinary.
Have you been offered a national award as a result?
Not to my knowledge.
It may still come, Greg, before you leave.
I mean, of course, I don't think I'm allowed to accept national awards, John.
Well, you can have an honorary award. Now, the first 100 years of new government.
100 days.
100 days. 100 years. It's true. Now, what's your view on that?
I mean, I think there's been a lot of there's been a lot of activity and a lot of desire to push things forward, and a lot of commitments for across the whole of the different ministerial areas. This is certainly an administration which is determined to make its mark, and which certainly seems determined to build business, improve social rights, and improve people's position. Now, the key to this will be on continuing to deliver going forward, and on delivering the promises that are made. So I think this government has hit the ground running, is doing what needs to be done, and just needs to continue to do what needs to be done.
Quite a lot of negative things, though. I mean, reversing the sugar estates, prosecuting people in GCOM and so on. Should they have been a bit more positive?
Well, I mean, I think there's lots of people who would argue that reversing the closures of the sugar estates is not a negative thing. I won't comment on legal cases that are in front of the court, beyond to say that that also is a legal process. People are innocent until proven guilty. There will be a legal case that will go forward, and we all wait and see what happens as a result of that case. But I think there's talk of changes of people and whatever, but it's not unknown in our countries that when administrations change, public officials change. And in some countries, indeed, you will find a situation where an administration changes and the whole top level of public servants change.
Yes, of course.
I think it's the nature of how things go.
Now, one of your jobs is obviously to promote British business.
Mm-hmm.
How many calls a week do you get from British businessmen wanting to trade with Guyana now?
Well, I mean, we're probably now looking at, I think whenever I first arrived about 2015, we were getting a couple a week. Now we're probably getting a couple a day. Now, people might think those are all oil and gas related. Actually, far from it. A lot of these people are, a lot of these organizations are, working on infrastructure, they're working on education, they're working on health, they're working in retail, and it goes from the people who maybe would want to set up an office here to do something, to people who want to do joint ventures, to people who want to sell their widgets or whatever their product is through a local distributor. So it's a broad swathe of things, and I think, but I think what is important, and certainly what we reinforce to all of those people is, bottom line has to be, what is and how is Guyana going to benefit from what you are planning on doing? So how are you going to expand local content? How are you going to train up local Guyanese people to do the jobs? How are you going to enhance the skill base, etc.? So the concept of local content, and I think the concept of local content for UK companies has always been something they've taken on board from a very long time. But we have stressed very clearly that whatever you are planning to do has to be for the benefit of Guyana as well as for the benefit of you as a UK business.
So imperialism 2.0 doesn't wash in Guyana.
You mentioned imperialism, but I think this is we're in a different world now, John. We're in a world where we are equal partners. Going back to the Commonwealth again, there are 54 members of the Commonwealth. All 54 members' votes count exactly the same, regardless of size, regardless of history. And so this is a partnership. And certainly the way UK companies look at doing business here in Guyana, it is as a partnership, not in any old-fashioned colonial way.
How many of those inquiries have become real things, have fructified, as the Guyanese would say?
I mean, it's hard to actually put a percentage figure on it because, sometimes some of the people who are inquiring are sort of speculative, I'm thinking of this or whatever, and then never really follow up on it. But what I will say is that there's a significantly larger number of British companies either on the ground here or actively working with others here than there was 5 years ago. And there's a significantly enhanced UK export finance offer on the table as well. Whenever I arrived, there was export finance for about $50 million US. As I said here today, the export finance offer totals about $1 billion US. So there's a.
How does that work? How do the Guyanese benefit from that?
That's what this ultimately means. So our export credit agency, all it requires is 20% UK content. So 20%, whatever project you're doing. So let's say you want to do a bridge, and I'm not saying this is what they're talking about, but let's say you want to do a bridge. So we can supply or cover the funding or guarantee the funding to build that bridge. Who builds that bridge? We don't really mind. Guyanese company can build a bridge. That's fine. As long as the 20% UK content could be project management, it could be architect, it could be design. But it's very much, open to Guyanese businesses to bid for. It's not just, UK businesses. As long as you have a UK partner, you can do it.
Is that a loan or a gift, Greg? Is that a loan or a gift?
No, so UK Export Finance is loan, it's not grant.
Right.
It's about 0.9% interest, I think, at the minute. But it can do loans or it can do guarantees. So, for example, if you were a British company and you need to borrow £10 million to do your project here, we will effectively provide you with insurance that if for some reason, and I'm not saying this would happen here, but if for some reason you weren't paid the £10 million by whoever's contracting you to build to do the project, then we will pay you the money instead so that you do not end up out of pocket.
But you're competing with the other new imperialists, who are the Chinese, of course, who are maybe building airports or maybe not building airports. How does that?
Well, work? Ultimately the choice comes down to the government and comes down to the people who put the projects forward. Do they want to seek that sort of support from us Now, I would obviously say that our offer is significantly, is better than anybody else's offer. And the fact, I think with our 20% UK content, I think we're the lowest credit agency or credit guarantee agency in terms of what we expect to be spent in our home country. But ultimately, we worked, a lot of the credit agencies work together on things. Whenever I was in Kazakhstan, we, the French and the German credit agencies, worked together on providing Airbus planes to Air Astana. So, this is not necessarily a competition, because there's a lot of collaboration between the credit agencies as well, because we might have different areas of expertise, or a project might span a couple of different countries. And so therefore it makes sense to go with a mix of 1, 2, 3, 4, however many necessary.
If you were to address the CBI in Britain on opportunities in Guyana, what would you say were the sort of the 3 best opportunities of British business in Guyana?
I think there's a lot to be done on this move from heavy fuel oil or sort of fossil fuel power generation through to renewables. I think there's a lot of expertise in the UK on that, including by places like Aberdeen, who are now moving from, what was the oil boom to recalibrating, their industry to different areas such as wind. If you go up to Aberdeen now, you will see one of the largest wind farms in the UK. It's offshore Aberdeen. It's called Vattenfall. So there's a lot of potential there on the renewable side of things. I think there's a lot of potential on education. The UK has a good education offer. I think there's a lot of opportunity on infrastructure, but it's hard. I think there's so much opportunity, John, that I don't think I would say I would say the CBI, right, your guys should only focus on A, B, and C. I think there are opportunities here for any number of different industries in the UK. Even if you look at the health industry, for example, we're doing some work on health facilities here, but there's work on the design of hospitals. There's work on operating hospitals. There's skills there. As I said, education we've talked about, agriculture. We still, it's small in comparison to what it was, but we still have an agriculture, a fairly large agriculture industry back in the UK. So there's, how to make your agriculture as efficient and effective and environmentally friendly as possible. So, how can you expand production without using pesticides, without using artificial fertilizers, for example?
What are your legacies? Of course, that Virgin Atlantic are going to start a once-weekly flight to Georgetown. Is that any idea?
Well, I haven't heard that they're actually starting, John, but they're certainly talking about it. And
I thought I read somewhere that they were planning it a week or 2 back. But I might be wrong.
So, there's certainly discussions going on about more direct air links, and I think I would certainly support more direct links. As you well know, there is a sizable diaspora back in the UK, maybe not as much as there is up in the US and Canada, but still a sizable diaspora. And a lot of those people come back here on a regular basis. I lost count of the numbers of times when I'd fly over to Barbados on layout or whatever, and a large chunk of the plane would be taken up with British passport holders who were coming back to visit family or going back home after visiting family.
A question came in from Juanita Cox, and she wants to know about Mercury PR. Well, they're a sort of Cambridge analytical style company. Was it right for the PPP to use them, and was it right for AppNew to use the people they did?
Who am I to say whether a political party should or should not use someone? I think that's more a question for the parties themselves. Lots of political parties around the world use companies such as that. I'm not sure it's for me to say whether it's
Did they
right
make a
or
difference?
wrong.
Do you think they made a difference?
I don't know. I mean, has there been any real study of whether or not they changed anybody's views in the world? I mean, I certainly know that the position I took post-election was dictated by nobody except me and my government. And, I know people would say I'm lying on that, but that's wrong. I mean, our position was decided by the UK government and was not influenced by anybody outside of the UK government.
There was an editorial a week or so back in the Culture News attacking you as a white man interfering in the Guyanese elections. How did you feel about that?
Water off a duck's back, John.
Let's move on. Off next week, via America,
Yes.
back to the UK, and then to the golden shores of Ulster. You're going to Ulster for Christmas.
Yeah, so I'll go and see my dad. He's still there. So assuming we're still not in some national lockdown and I can physically get there, then I'll be spending Christmas with my father. I saw him last in September. So it's his 80th birthday on the 11th of December. So we'll be having a Christmas stroke late birthday party for my father.
Lots of Ulster fry. And lots of
Well,
nice
yeah,
food.
and lots of Guinness and Irish whiskey as well, I suspect, John.
Pubs are not open. Pubs may be open in Northern Ireland.
Well, even the pubs aren't open. That's what off licenses are for.
Now, and then back to London, where you're going to head the Caribbean desk for 6 months.
Yeah, so I'm going. The person who heads up the Caribbean bit of the office is on maternity leave, so I have agreed to go back and cover that role for that 6 month period while she's on maternity leave. It makes eminent sense, for me to do that, given where I'm coming from and given that, we have worked very closely with our regional colleagues. So yeah, so that's the immediate plan going, the immediate job prospects or the job activity going forward.
So when is the next UK Caribbean Forum and where is it?
So I think there's a discussion going on at the minute about it. I think there's this whole thing about how we do things in a COVID time. And as I said, there's a bit of back and forth going on about how we do it and where we do it and what the format of it might be. It's certainly been delayed. I mean, it's been delayed on a couple of occasions. It was meant to be earlier on this year, but obviously it was meant to be in April of this year. But obviously that was postponed because of COVID. We'd already postponed it from 2 years before that for I can't remember what reason. I've lost track. But clearly, I think there's an understanding that it's been a long time. I think 2016 was the last UK Caribbean Forum. So we are long overdue one. It's just a matter of how we do one in the new world that we currently live in.
Well, you may be back in Ghana in the next 6 months in a much more important role. Do you plan to be at all?
No, I mean I'm committed to working in the Caribbean and London for the next 6 months. No other plans beyond that.
But that doesn't involve trips to the Caribbean, does it at all?
Well, I hope it does. Well, then again, I'd quite like to. With the exception of Trinidad and Barbados, I haven't actually been to any of the rest of the Caribbean. And Suriname, obviously, I haven't actually been to the rest of the Caribbean since I came to this job, and that's nearly 6 years. So I'm thinking, I'd quite like to go and visit some of the other bits of the Caribbean. But who knows where or when we might be able to travel.
Now, our last question from Andre Brandy. We had the first question. Do you see evidence for the Ireland administration reaching out to the opposition and the Afro-Guyanese population?
Do I see evidence? I think there's I mean, the president has talked about the importance of constitutional reform, and obviously constitutional reform would require, I mean, if you ultimately get it, as you well know, it takes 2/3 of Parliament to agree any constitutional changes. So, you can't do that without the opposition being involved. But I think it's a two-way street, really. It has, both sides have to be willing to talk to the other. And I think this is where we come back to reconciliation and constitutional reform again, and the need to bring everybody together, and for everybody to feel that they're very legitimate concerns, because I think they're very legit. Everybody's got concerns about situations or whatever, and I think it's important that they're allowed and able to explain those.
That has to be an outsider, surely. I mean, Jimmy Carter achieved it. The Commonwealth.
If you do the Northern Ireland example again, it was Senator George Mitchell from the US. Certainly, I'm not sure the Northern Ireland peace process would have worked without George Mitchell and the active involvement of people like President Clinton. So I certainly wouldn't say there shouldn't be outside involvement. I guess the question would be, who should that outside involvement be, and where should they come from? And that's ultimately a decision, and that has to be taken by all of the political parties. And I think we talk a lot about Indo-Guyanese and Afro-Guyanese, but it's not just about Indo-Guyanese and Afro-Guyanese. That's 70% roughly of the population. There's still 1/3 of the population is indigenous or European, or classify themselves in the census as mixed race. So it's not just about Indo-Guyanese and Afro-Guyanese. The indigenous population, the people who regard themselves as mixed, and the Europeans also have to be involved in this process.
Now, after your stint back in the Foreign Office, you're going to retire to North US.
God, no, I'm not retiring yet, John. No, I'm not that old, for goodness sake.
What is it?
I mean, ultimately,
you're building a house in North US, aren't you?
Well, if I am, I didn't know that. I mean, ultimately, I think I've got a very clear desire to move to Scotland. Now, I'm from Northern Ireland, but I've got a very clear desire to move to Scotland. And that's certainly where I intend to end up. But I certainly don't expect to be retiring anytime soon. As I say, I'm not that old. In fact, on the COVID vaccination list, I'm near the bottom.
I'm tier 4, so I'm all right, thank you.
I'm well below tier 4. I think I'm like tier 10 or something, John.
Well, why North US? I mean, extremities of the United Kingdom.
Well, it could be, it could be North US, it could be Shetland, who knows in the end of the day. I mean, it's the reason for that part of the world is it's just spectacularly beautiful, really, and spectacularly friendly. But at the same time, wherever it might be, there are still very good links down to London for work, or over to Northern Ireland to see my father or such like. But as I say, I'm not retiring anytime soon, man.
But it's bloody cold and bloody lonely, isn't it? And up there.
Well, some people would say it's cold in Northern Ireland as well.
Not as cold as that.
I don't know, because normally the weather you get in Northern Ireland is the weather you get in Scotland the next day. John, I've lived in Kazakhstan. In the middle of winter in Kazakhstan, it was minus 53. We didn't see greenery for about 6 months of the year. I lived in Belarus. I was in Washington. All of these are countries which have got very extreme seasons. Yeah. And strange as it may seem for somebody who spent nearly 6 years in Guyana, I am at heart a cold weather person, and I actually quite like feeling that nip. It's good whenever you're walking the dog.
The very, very last question. Dream on, after you've done the Caribbean desk, where do you want your next posting to be?
Well, I have a history of going places which are, a bit different. As I say, if you look at my career, I've done the Baltic states, I've done Belarus, I've done Ghana, Washington, Kazakhstan, and here. I've always sort of hankered to go to New Zealand in Australia. I've been there on holidays. I've always hankered to go to New Zealand. But to be honest,
it's like Ulster in the 1950s. You'd love it.
So I've always hankered for that. But I've always, I've also quite sort of hankered after, because originally I've spent a lot of my time in what is termed the former Soviet Union. And all of those countries are hugely fascinating from me from a historical perspective as well as a political perspective, whatever. So going back somewhere in the former Soviet Union would be nice, but I suspect that would only be short term, because eventually, even though I like cold weather, I probably would want to go somewhere hot so I could come back to one of the islands over this way. We've opened up 4 new posts around here. So there's lots more options in the Caribbean than there was even whenever I arrived 6 years ago.
All right, and your favourite memory of Guyana? You touched on it a bit about an hour ago. Have you had a chance?
Favorite memory of Guyana. Actually, my favorite memory of Guyana was standing at the top of Kaiter with Prince Harry. And there was with Prince, yeah, and there was Prince Harry, myself, and the guide, and we were the only 3 people there. Everybody else was a bit away. And I remember standing there looking down the valley that goes from Kaiter and looking up the river in the other direction and going, it's fairly special to be in a job and in a place where you get to experience that.
Now, can I thank you for being a very, very good friend to Guyana, which you have been, and actually a very good friend to me, and also for being brutally honest over the last hour. Thank you so much, and I'm sure the audience appreciated this, and it'll be, if you missed any of it, it's all on YouTube, so you can watch it there. Thank you very much, Greg, and I think I'll talk to you next week.
You're most welcome, John. Have a good rest of your evening.
All right, all the best. Bye-bye now. Bye.
Cheers, bye.